Today, we're really fortunate to have Milt Garrett with us. Milt is, I can't give the whole bio because then we wouldn't have any time left to talk, but Milt actually was a university professor for 27 years. He's been involved in international quality control as a consultant and has had extensive experience in Russia. I'll let him expand a little bit on his bio, but I also have a little intro I want to read too, which will kind of focus on what Milt's going to talk about today. And he sent this to me, and it says, a year ago, he was invited to speak and to be one of the among 50 persons to be a citizen diplomat. And the purpose was to interview at random people in many Russian cities. 30 days and 8 cities later, he came away with views on the alleged, quote, annexation of Crimea, quote, that differs dramatically from what we believe here in the United States.
Listen to this.
I'm sorry. And we've invited him here today to talk about his discoveries and talking with over 100 citizens. He also says good research begins with meaningful unanswered questions. And he's given us a couple of questions here, and I'm going to just give you a couple of those. Was Crimea annexed illegally by Russia, or was it illegal in any sense? Is Crimea in reasonably poor shape economically and physically, as we're told, or is it well off? And I'll leave the others for Milt to cover. So Milt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
JD, thank you very much. I appreciate the courtesy. I've talked to empty rooms. It's kind of nice to have an audience. This is a little different audience, though, isn't it? President Morgan, I was not paying a close attention when you asked if there's any visiting Rotarians. I am. I'm a visiting Rotarian from Estes Park, and I'm a multiple Paul Harris Fellow. So thank you for inviting me. And let's see, I need to hit a couple of buttons here and put on your seat belts. Let's go. JD Murphy asked me to talk about why Russians are mad at us. And I'm more than happy to do that because I've spent time in the pool halls and in the restaurants and in the bars. I've been in so many hotels and I've been in so many companies and homes. And I've had clients from the Baltic to the Pacific and from the Arctic Ocean to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And for over 22 years, I have been just randomly asking questions, the same kind of questions we have. 10 of those 22 years have been pro bono on behalf of Rotary clubs out of 3 different clubs, Grand Junction, Estes Park, and Cheyenne. So I want to share with you what JD Murphy is concerned about. Why are Russians mad at us? Well, as a physician would not give you a prescription unless they do some root cause diagnosis. And this is what I want to share with you. What's the conditions over there and what are the root causes? If you remember, Mikhail Gorbachev on Christmas Day in 1991 said the Soviet Union no longer exists. So shortly right after that, our new president, it was in February of 92, our new president, George Bush, our new Secretary of State, James Baker, Francois Mitterrand and Margaret Thatcher all met with Mr. Gorbachev in Malta, and for the next 7 months, they hammered out some conditions and some agreements. Now, it's in those agreements, in those that are available now. You can see it on the internet as of December 2019. But they say America cannot keep its agreements. Well, we have violated 6 agreements, and I keep getting this thrown up at me by my Russian staff and some of the clients I have. Not only can you Americans not keep your agreements internationally, but you have a hard time keeping your agreements with your Native Americans. Well, that's kind of hard for me to kind of defend. But anyway, the real criticism right now is called unfairness. And so what I want to do is talk about that. They've got 29 years of perceived grievances against us. I can't do that all today. And recently, Putin has said, you Americans have lied to us too many times and everything has its limits. Now, please note before I begin, this will not be a political speech, I promise you. And I'm not an apologist for anyone. I'm not covering for Bush. I'm not covering for Obama. I'm not covering for Putin or Trump. None of that. I'm just talking about root causes as what seems to be the reason that they are mad at us. And yes, I am fully aware. I know about the news of the day. Yes, Russia, I think, is destabilizing every democracy in Europe. And as of this morning at 22 minutes after 8, you saw how we've now put sanctions on Putin because of Alexei. And if you want to talk about that when we're done. So I want to talk about the sensitive one because this is Rotary. There's something unusual in here that I did not know that I need to go to and find out from my staff. So I want to talk about two sides of the coin, Russia, Crimea, and some of the things I found on the ground that were very unusual. 142 Russians love this man. Vladimir Pozner turns out to be #1 TV journalist for all of Russia, all 11 time zones. I spent about 2 hours with him, I and several others, and he has precise English. He was born in France, raised in New York City, and his father was Russian. So during the 60s or 70s, he took the family back to Russia. And he told us, first off, you in America hear that our Russian media is controlled by the government, but I want you to know I am not, and mine is not, and I hate Putin, and he hates me, and he will not close me down because he can't. He says, now I want you all to remember something. Now this is really one of the roots of why the Russians are mad at us. And hold on, because I need to give a definition first of what's coming up. The Confederate Independent States is the CIS. Soviet Union used to be 15 regions, but it's now at 14 countries plus region, independent states plus Russia, excuse me. Now, some of those independent Confederate states you'd know is Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, and in this case, Russia, Ukraine. So he started off our 2-hour presentation, says you all have heard Putin say that the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century was the breakup of the Soviet Union. You have, we have frequently. He says, but you Americans seem to have forgotten the rest of that conversation. His next paragraph was this. Those in the CIS had no administrative bodies and no economic means, no institutions for governance and no way of supporting themselves because all these were features held in Moscow, including the banking systems. And there was one currency for all 15 regions. And now it's just us with the rubles and they all had to create everything else. Furthermore, he said that the catastrophe in the ensuing decade after 1991 was the destruction of a functioning economy and the rape and the looting of the entire countries by those who were becoming oligarchs, the homegrown variety and the foreign imports, the predatory global, and he kind of snickered, Americans. Therefore, everyone in the CIS became instantly more poverty struck than those left behind in what's now called the country of Russian Federation. This, they claim, is the root cause as to why there was corruption in Ukraine and all the other problems they've had and why Americans are mad at us. I can't cover all that today. So I want to talk about Ukraine and I want to get down there and talk about the hard issue, which is Crimea. Ukraine. Ukraine was never a country until 1922. And it became a country after World War I. The victors of World War I, the French and the Brits, sat down with Lenin and carved this country out of whole cloth. And they took a lot of what used to be Poland, Romania, and Hungary, and they created what and tied over what was Russia. And now this is not a clean demarcation line, this red line, but more or less to the left are the German, Polish, Romanian, and dominant Catholic, and to the right, dominant Russian Orthodox. And you probably have a little history about religion in that area. The Russian Orthodox and the Catholic, they tend to see the world a little differently. Well, Ukraine, especially those in the West, want to go to the European Union and join the NATO. Those to the right, Russia, they're not interested in doing that. They want to stay back home. And in fact, why Putin is so upset about Eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region particularly, is because in the Donbass region is where they have the largest coal mines, the largest steel mines, and see the Sea of Azov down there in the river to the right of the red line. There are 8 major shipbuilding companies in that region that built the Russian naval fleet and the Russian commercial fleet. Furthermore, over in that region to the right is where the gas propulsion engines were built for the Russian naval fleet, where they were built, designed, and maintained. And that's why Russia is just terribly upset why the West would take Crimea and Ukraine. Outside the frame on the far right is the largest chemical plant in all of Russia, and that was the sole source supplier for much of what Putin needed for his economy. This young woman I'm showing here is named Yulia Mozgova, and she lives in Loveland, and I kind of look after her, and I become the surrogate grandfather for her 9-year-old kid. Talking to her last night just for an update. She's from that city where the plant is, and her dad is the chemical engineer at the chemical plant. And she said, talking to her parents yesterday, there's absolutely no war going on over there. The COVID has probably prevented a lot of that. And both sides on the war front have parted and gone back about a kilometer. Well, we knew that last summer. So let's get down here to the conversation of the day. Crimea, it's the peninsula on the south. And I want to direct our attention eventually here to a place called Sevastopol. Sevastopol is the largest Russian naval base that does not freeze over in the summertime. Russia has another naval base that doesn't freeze over in the, I don't mean summertime, excuse me, wintertime. And he has another naval base that doesn't freeze over in the wintertime, and that's up in Kaliningrad, which is on the Baltic, just south of the Arctic Circle. So why Putin can't allow that to go away to any other country is because that's his exit into the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, into the Mediterranean, into the Atlantic. And you've heard President Xi of China, and particularly in this case, President Putin of Russia, saying, you Americans, you don't have a God-given right to control all the oceans on the earth. We're going to be there. So I want to open up then here and talk about this meaningful unanswered questions that arise from our side. And when I was over there, one of the questions is, was it a Russian annexation or was it something else? And how bad is the economy in Crimea and in Russia? And the US sanctions, how's that working out? And then I want to hit something a little bit of light and fun, unusual, different, some differing views. And then I want to conclude with Rotary's influence in Russia. And I'm really trying to set myself up, audience, I'm really trying to set myself up for another presentation because Rotary has done a magnificent effort for the economy of Russia since 1995. And a lot of us, I think, in America are not quite familiar with it. I want to share that if I can. And then let's close with your questions, observations, and challenges. Was it annexation or was it a legal vote? Well, let's review something. Crimea became part of what was not quite yet Russia back in 1654. That's 34 years after the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts. Now, 1654 would probably tell you that you can see why the Russians are ethnic and why they have the religion and the language and the loves and the dance and the stories. They are Russians by ancestry since 1654, except when the Ottoman Empire in the 1770s and 1780s decided to expand their influence, and the Turks invaded Crimea and what would be eventually part of Russia and part of Ukraine. And Catherine the Great, you know, as Catherine #2, said, that's not going to last. And she went to war and reclaimed it in 1783. So Crimea has been part of Russia since 1783, or 1654, you take your choice. However, Khrushchev, if you remember, in 1954, gave Crimea to Ukraine as a birthday gift, the 300th birthday, see, 1654, 1954. And why did he do that? Khrushchev, it seems, was born in Ukraine, raised in Ukraine, and when he became premier living in Moscow during the Soviet times, he was having some political difficulties down in Ukraine, so he decided, I'll solve this problem, and he gave them the gift of Crimea and gave them the large naval port of Sevastopol. All right, so now we see there's a marriage, legitimate, and apparently by proclamation, that Crimea is Ukraine. Now, of all the 14 independent states, each one of them has an independent parliament, and the independent parliament of Crimea decided in September 2013 and said, folks, for the last 59 years, we have been in decay, we have been under corruption, and we have been poverty struck. And besides that, you all remember that in 2012, the Ukrainian parliament passed a law that says everybody now will speak Ukrainian and anybody who speaks Russian will be outlawed. Well, some of the people I've interviewed said, if you're over 25, what's the likelihood you want to do that? And if you're over 40, what's the likelihood you think you have the capacity to do that? So the parliament says you may have a vote. On March 2014, the vote was held, 70% of the people showed up, 97% of the people said, let's go home. Well, I have the documents, the Crimean referendum documents. I don't know if they're legal. However, I have 58 pages and I'm happy to make copies available for you if you want them. But the real question comes up, what's their rationale for doing that? Well, the rationale, it turns out, is the United Nations Charter, Article 1.2, which says anybody can have self-determination. Well, let me introduce to you a woman who's a Rotarian, who happens to be over many years my chief of operations for all the Russian Federation. Her name is Elisa Ozharova. You'll meet her again later on. Elisa says, Milt, you ought to know that that's legal because Rotary is part of why the United Nations Charter was formed. Milt, you remember after World War II, Rotary brought 50 nations together to hammer out the peace for the future. And of the 50 nations who came, 49 of the members were on the panel and 11 of them were Rotarians. This charter, Milt, don't you know, is patterned after the Rotary International Charter. Well, I didn't know that. I have to go to Russia. I didn't get that in my indoctrination of my Rotary Club in Albuquerque. So this is on the internet. But I go to the Rotary Club in Crimea, and this is the president, and he was a little less caring than Elisa was with me. And when I was introduced as an American Rotarian, he let me know how the cow ate the cabbage, and everybody around that meeting, the table, took a share at me and said, you folks don't understand, this is legal. And if you call us and you criticize us for that, why haven't you criticized Catalonia for trying to separate from Spain? Why didn't you criticize Scotland as they tried in 2016 to break away from Great Britain? About 54% of the people voted there to stay with Great Britain. But now that Brexit has taken place, you've been reading in the news that the Scots, the Northern Irish, and the Welsh, they are wanting to talk about being independent. They want to stay with the European Union. And I didn't know this, so they're telling me, how do you think that the Quebecers in 1980 tried to separate from Canada? But the vote was, of course, to stay with Canada. And Milt, so on December 12th, 2019, the islands of Bougainville voted to have independence and break away from Papua New Guinea. All of it under the auspices of the United Nations Charter Article 1.2. Well, okay, that's their point of view. What is the argument in the West? My compliments to my son dug this up for me. This is the international law perspective. There's 22 pages. I'd be happy to make a copy for you. The top international lawyers and scholars put this together after a certain amount of time, and the United Nations Security Council couldn't pass it because, you know, one nation can vote against it, and China and Russia voted against it. So, remember what mom and dad said? Son, there are two sides to every story, don't you know? And so you recognize the challenge coin for Rotary. And on the right-hand side is the code of ethics. And we are reminded to do well to remember John F. Kennedy's words. There are few, if any, issues where all the truth and all the right and all the angels are on one side. So we say that the Russians invaded and occupied the Crimean Peninsula on the Black Sea. They say that's bogus, Milt. You guys don't understand. That naval base at Sevastopol has been there long before the Soviet Union, and we've had a treaty with Russia since 1997. That's good until 2042. And that treaty says we can have 24,000 military men and women there. Well, I wasn't on the base, but I was outside, and I interviewed people, and there's about 4,000 people short at that time. They say also, we military were called out to protect those government buildings from the Bandera motorcyclists that were coming down from Ukraine to fight us. And most of those military at that base have been of Russian ancestry. I was told about 24% of the people were Ukrainians, so they just tore their patches off and went home. And I've seen the video. Second question, this photograph is from my airplane. This is an interchange, what looks like an interstate. Is Crimea in poor shape? Well, the Russian Federation has budgeted $15 billion for 553 projects. And when I was there, 279 were underway. I've seen the new mosque. I've seen the new hotels, the new hospitals. I've seen the new apartment buildings. I've seen and been on the new roads. If any of us remember traveling down from Cheyenne by way of Wellington through Fort Collins south to Loveland, this is what they have. Their highways are like between Longmont and Denver. Marvelous highways, perfect. Well, $15 billion will do a lot. This is the new bridge, the longest bridge in all of Europe at 11.8 miles, Crimea Peninsula. In the upper left and the bottom right is the connection to the Russian Federation. And the bridge to the far right is the new railroad bridge that opened up for traffic on December 2019. So they can go home back and forth, and they are doing it well. I've been to all three cities, major cities in Crimea. Everybody has a new airport. Does it look like DIA? This is out of my hotel room in Yalta. You recognize the name Yalta. That's where FDR, Stalin, and Churchill all signed the proclamation to end World War II. That's at a site to the left up that road several miles. Now Yalta is 365 years old. Look, this is the Baltics. It's warm, it's balmy, it's late fall, early winter. This is my hotel, 3-star, my bedroom, my bathroom. This is the breakfast at a restaurant down the street. This is not in the hotel. Every city I've been to, all Russians for breakfast or salads and wine, all the wine you want. Take one, take two, come back, get more. I did, it was really kind of fun. I liked it. More breakfast. This was lunch somewhere else. This was supper somewhere else. Next question, what's the impact of the sanctions on Crimea, in this case, the Russian and eventually? Well, Crimea used to get 200 cruise ships a year, now they get 0, and it's less than that because of the pandemic. This is my client as well as my interpreter first, Tatiana Bakalina, and she used to have one job, but now she's had to adapt. She has 4, so she's like an American. She's adapted. This family, this is Elisa again, and I introduced her earlier. Nikita's her husband. They are tickled to death to have sanctions placed on them, they tell me. Why? They're in the construction business. They sell or rent elevators for high-rise construction as well as cranes. And by the way, before the pandemic, the national bird of Russia was the crane. But why are they tickled to death? She says because they have no more American competition. 42 competitors have had to leave the country. They're making money hand over fist up until the pandemic, she said. This family doesn't like the sanctions. The commercial photographer, Anton, my client, now my long-term friend, he said, because of the sanctions and now the pandemic, I can't have, there's no business because of weddings and ceremonies have been canceled. So I just go down to Turkey. Now I'm making money in Turkey. Adaptation. This is an interesting company. Yuri Karamanov. Yuri Karamanov has 6 dental clinics in 4 different cities. And when I first started working with him in 2005, he had 15 employees. Last time I was working with him, he has 215 employees. He said, sanctions doesn't bother me. I can't buy from Germany anymore. So now I buy from Denmark and Spain. This time last year, he bought some high quality equipment from China. He says, sanctions don't bother me one iota. The pandemic is. This is his daughter, Anastasia, and this is her husband, Igor. It's Igor, not Igor. And this are the 2 children. And before sanctions were put on Russia, she used to be in the cosmetics business, but she couldn't do that. So now she's in the fine chocolates business. These 2 chocolates I have in my refrigerator right now. And as of last Friday morning, this is her new website. She does international work and airports and whatnot. So she said, what's the policy for children? My first child, Nikita, the tall kid, she got $10,000 for Daniil, second child, $14,000. And if I have a third child, I get $7,200. And I verified this with her Sunday morning. And she says that's indeed correct. And it's been updated because on New Year's Day, all new mothers get additional money than I got. How do I know that? Because this is my godson. And it looks like maybe America's thinking about doing something with this. Powell was last Thursday morning newspaper. All right, you're interested. Other clubs I visited with, I'm interested. Do they want war? They don't want war. Ask how many military bases around the world. U.S. has over 800. How many does Russia have? 8. They're thinking as of last year, maybe putting one in Eritrea. They said, there's no way we can have a war with you, Milt. You Americans' budget is 14-1. NATO is 4-1. You're a member of the club, Professor Bill Timpson, showed me some data a year ago, it's 16-1. So as I conclude, what's Rotary's influence? Well, we have to change our leadership on July 1st, all clubs around the world, but not before. In the time of the Tsar and Soviet Union, all leadership was held in Moscow and there was no leadership development. Charitable works, you know about that. I don't need to talk about that. And the big one that's really helped Russia is they now have a code of ethics for doing business, and they've done a darn good job. And that's why I want to talk to you in the future about that. This is my club in Ekaterinburg. This is where I attend, and this is what the presidents wear. And this is my club. What's the average age, you think? Now, there's not all members. A lot of them are spouse. The DG spoke to our club in Estes Park here this last year and said he thought the average age in America for Rotarians is 75. Russia and Rotary is in good hands. And on our payroll, we have a woman that works out of the Moscow office named Natasha, and her job 100% is to create new Rotary clubs in all 11 time zones. Right now, there's about 81. All right, in closing, when I go around the country and ask, do you think your country ever will revert to the old Soviet Union? And I've been frequently reminded, especially by my staff, what Putin said in 2010. Mr. Putin said, anyone who does not regret the breakup of the Soviet Union has no heart, but anyone who wants its rebirth in its previous form has no head. All right, next time, if I can have one, please, I'd like to talk to you about what Rotary has done for Russia since 1995, and it's done a magnificent thing for their economy. In summary, Crimea is Russian to the core. They say we're never going back to Ukraine in your lifetime, Milt. All people I visit with randomly on the street say they're happy to pay their taxes to the Russian Federation, and their justification for going back to Russia is Article 1.2, which had to do with Rotary in 1945. And they are just like us. They like to laugh. They like to dance. And they like to make love. All right. Thank you very much. It's your questions and observations, and I'm happy for any challenges. I appreciate the courtesy. Thanks, folks.
Well, Milt, thank you so much. What a great presentation, and welcome as a visiting Rotarian from Estes Park. We're just delighted to have you as both a visiting Rotarian and a speaker. And sounds like you have dual membership, that you also have a club in Russia. Was that picture? Was that the club in Russia or the Estes Park Club?
That's kind of misleading. That's where I attend when I'm there, because my office is in right there nearby that club. And I've had 6 different memberships, 5 different clubs, 6 memberships.
Well, once a Rotarian, always a Rotarian.
Yeah, as a charter member. Yeah.
Oh, great. Any questions for Milt?
Challenges.
This is Carl. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the connection you made between what's happening at the national level and at the Rotary level, because many times, so many of us don't see much of a connection at all. It seems like they're on different planets and trying to do different things, different objectives. And the idea that the two would cooperate and actually start out the United Nations is just blows me away.
Yeah, and I never learned that in the orientation. It helps to get out of the bubble and go overseas.
Yeah, this shows how stunted our education is in the United States when it comes to world affairs.
Yeah, a little ethnocentric. And there's 2 more presentations I'd love to give you to round this off, because JD's question was, why are Russians mad at us? I've hardly covered that. If you're interested. But the one I really want to do for you is, what have we done for Russia? It's just been dramatic. It's amazing. You'll love it.
So I guess, why are the Russians mad at us? Are they?
Because we don't hold to our agreements that we set in October 1992. Nuclear agreements. The famous comment by James Baker says, "We will not move 1 inch east. We'll not move 1 inch east." That means no more NATO. There's 17 countries of NATO in 1992. Now there's about 30. And we violated all that. We violated the missiles in Poland and Romania, and it just goes on and on. Yeah, their jaws are tight, and I'm kind of the target sometimes, but I'm 6'7". I'm big.
Diane had a question here. Diane, do you want to speak up?
Yeah, I wondered how the Rotarians feel about Putin and his leadership and his longevity in office.
It depends on the age of the person I ask that question.
Yeah.
If they're our age, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to even talk about politics. It's very sensitive. And here recently, it's hard to get them to answer any of these kinds of questions. And I don't know why. I think maybe they think they're monitored, but they won't even confirm that because they just don't. Now, Anton, the photographer, he said, Putin's got to go. And several of my interpreters say Putin's got to go. So it depends on the age. And the protest with Navalny is another example. It depends on the age of the person. Some support protests, some don't. Some of my people have been out. The older folks, the Rotarians haven't. So
what about your journalist friend?
My journalist friend, same thing, ready to go. Send it in. He's, of course, he lays it out. He sticks it to Putin. I had to think who's my journalist friends. Vladimir Posner. He sticks it to Putin. Oh, if you could get on TV. He was so much fun. He's American.
So, excuse me. So, Milt, do they feel that we're one of the worst countries in terms of keeping our word? Do they feel like Russia has done a good job of keeping their word?
No, they don't criticize themselves. We don't criticize ourselves. That's kind of a national thing. Right now, they're laughing at us. They think we're foolish. It goes back many times about how we can't keep our agreements with the Native American tribes. But just this recent thing with the Capitol. So I get a lot of, so I'm looking after a woman here in town up in Estes Park who is a long-term friend from Russia, and she sends me all the news articles and she translates them for me. And the news articles happen to be government, so you can imagine what they say, but they just think we're foolish. We shouldn't be talking about democracy because why should we pitch it to everybody else when we can't maintain it ourselves? That's a short conversation, but now they're laughing at us.
Yep.
Right now. But Rotarians, let's keep at it. And I've accepted an invitation to go back again as a citizen diplomat this time. The leader is the former ambassador to USSR, Jack Matloff. And we're supposed to go in June, but I think it's getting postponed because of COVID. It's fun.
How is their COVID situation in Ukraine and Crimea? Are they getting? Are they able to get vaccines?
Well, it's rolling out a little slowly. We're doing faster than they are. They've got the Sputnik 5. And so, it's happening to them little by little, age again. But they're fun. They're just like us. I mean, they look like us, they think like us, they have the same goals and same aspirations for their kids and for their senior years. The only difference is religion, but it's Christian and they're happy. I'm happy. Thank you very much. I appreciate the courtesy for sharing this with you.
No, it's our pleasure. Any other questions? All right. Well, Milt, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. It was very, very enlightening. And I think that's been my experience in some of my limited travels to other countries is that at heart, we are all people. And we really, we have much more to share that's in common than is different. So
that's right. If you strip away the veneer of all of us, we're pretty much the same, like you say. That's right.
Yeah. So really appreciate you sharing this with us. And
thank you, JD.
we'll look forward. And our club, as a token of our appreciation, will be making a donation in your name to the Book Trust. We sponsor a classroom at Putnam Elementary and provide books to them. So through the Book Trust. So we will be making that donation in your name. So we thank you.
Thank you.